Hi, this is Chuck Marquardt John Barrentine with the Barrentine Group. We're so excited that Sasha Struthers is with us. She is an extraordinary attorney who works with landlord and tenant rights, and she will knock your socks off with her knowledge and her stories, and we can't wait to get into it.
So, Sasha, thank you, yes, for being with us. And one of the things that we're getting a lot of calls from people and a lot of conversations regarding people that want to reach out and they want to help and they want to lease to fire victims. I guess my first question for you is, can a landlord in the city of Los Angeles limit the leasing of their property to strictly a fire victim?
Yes and no. When you start limiting things to victim versus not, you want to be sort of careful that you don't run amok of what's called the Fair Employment and Housing Act. You don't want to get a California Civil Rights Division complaint against you that you had, a family with kids that went to submit rental application, and then you went with a fire victim that's a single, the single individual or a couple with no kids. And then it's like, well, you discriminated because we had kids. So putting sort of definitive marks like that, you want to be careful because there's other laws that are still going on that tenants have rights. You don't want to take your good intention and end up getting yourself kind of wrangled in some sort of violation, like, oh, you took a Palisades victim, but not a Section 8 tenant voucher holder, which that's going to kind of come up in a bit when we talk about, the sort of the HUD rent increase limits or the price gouging limits. So you still want to
Yes.
be mindful that those laws still are in play, and all tenants, irrespective of wildfire victimhood or not, have rights. So yes, or no, I don't know. It's want to be careful.
Well,
And exactly.
and going down that line, can you just give a very brief summation of what the fair housing laws are really trying to accomplish, just kind of in layperson's terms?
Yeah, well, fair housing laws in general in California are trying to accomplish that people have equal access to housing. That if you have multiple different applications that come in, that you're not vetting it based on someone's protected class. I like men over women. I like single people versus people with children. I like people that are Black over Hispanics. You don't want to run into where you start looking at someone's protected class characteristics and not looking at just strictly basically the credit worthiness of that applicant.
Yes, that's exactly right. And that's one of the things that we counsel our landlord clients on in that process is really setting a benchmark for the qualifications of those people that they're interested in having a tenant, setting a credit score, setting an income amount, setting a very specific and very clear benchmarks. And frankly, the first person that meets those benchmarks, that's your new tenant, right? And so there we try to eliminate all of the other characteristics that could be considered in an application for rent. Would you agree that that's the way forward?
Yes. And the way that they have sort of a new law this year with the screening fees that you can charge, basically, if you don't
Mm-hmm.
charge fees on a first come, first served basis, you have to refund the fees. So basically, if you get applications that come in, you process them, you know, first in, first out, basically. So if the first one comes in and they meet the criteria, that's pretty much who you got to go with.
Great. Thank you. And I think that's really helpful for our landlord friends that are out there and trying to make a determination on what they want to do with their property going forward.
Yeah.
And so, just to reiterate, what I heard is can't discriminate against protected classes, and that there are 17 of those. Is that correct? And
There might
then
be more. They
there might
add
be
a
more
few
now.
times. Yeah, and it depends on the employment context versus the housing. But I think there's at least like 17. There might be upwards of 20.
And what are all the sorts of things that you can have as minimum requirements? John kind of named them, but let's just be very clear. What are minimum requirements that it's acceptable to set if you are screening applicants?
So when you have, and this is sort of wildfire aside, this is, general
Right.
principles of leasing, you have basically the amount of money you're asking for. And this is pretty important for people with multifamily or, more than one unit in a building or have a portfolio. When you have residential and you're setting, okay, my price is $3,000 for this 3-bedroom, whatever it is, And you have to have, and these are just all examples of criteria. You have to have a 650 credit score. You can't, have any evictions on your record. You can't have been named in an eviction in the past. You can't have, can't have any sort of whatever, you don't want to have delinquencies on your credit, in the past 90 days, something like that. That would be a criteria you would put. You have to make 2.5 times the rent and income. Those are things that would be criteria that you would set. So it's going to go across the board. No bankruptcies, right? So then when you have an applicant that comes in and they go, hey, I have a Section 8 voucher, and they're the first one that comes in, you can't look at their income anymore because they have this voucher. That's their income criteria right there. They've met it by default. So then you have to look at the credit score. Well, you don't meet the credit. And what sometimes happens is you have a applicant and they don't meet the credit, but you want to kind of work with them. So you have, we want 650, but you have 550. We'll take it. And there's no consideration for the difference. Then you end up setting a new mark for all the other applicants that go forward. Because once you sort of change your criteria in one setting, you've adopted that criteria for anybody else going forward.
Right.
So that's something that's sort of a new thing that I've seen happen. Proper managers run into that problem. They go, well, we really want to work with this person. We really, we want to make them an exception. They had, all these extenuating circumstances and we want to cooperate with them. Well, now you've changed your criteria from 650 to 550. Some of the ways you sort of work around that is, the rent was $3,000. Maybe you go, it's going to be $3,010. Sometimes people do that. So we're going to charge a little bit more for the rent, but that's because we're taking in someone that's not creditworthy. But it really sort of depends because at some point, once you go through like a Section 8 application process, you're stuck with what Section 8 basically offers you. And it might be less than what HUD has for that area. Then you run into sort of comp. So Section 8 is sort of its own world. But keeping in mind, if you have applicants that you're running and then you change the criteria, you accept less than their criteria, you may set yourself up for changing all of your criteria for applicants going forward. So you have to be very careful. Once you set it, you got to really stick to your criteria.
So Sasha, we know there are so many landlords out there who really want to help people who have been affected by the wildfires, whether because they've lost their business or they've lost their home or any number of reasons. And yet we know that they still need to protect themselves. And we know that the laws are changing. The city laws are changing. The county laws are changing. The state laws are changing. Can you give us a little bit of understanding of what's changed for the landlords and things that they need to consider based on different laws that have been put out there? And let's start maybe with the state and then work down to county, and then let's talk LA City, because then there's any other number of cities, Santa Monica and Burbank and everything.
Yeah.
We can't get too far in the weeds.
And if I may, let's talk about anti-gouging separately from this, if we can.
Okay. So sort of at a state level and local level, there hasn't been much change aside from the price gouging. You as a landlord still have the right to vet applicants. So if you have an applicant that was unfortunately a victim of a fire, but they don't make the income or they don't have sort of the creditworthiness, we run into what we sort of talked about is, you have all these good intentions of wanting to help someone, but you're kind of skewing your own metrics, your own acceptance, your own criteria. So you have to be mindful of that. And another thing is, at a local level, there's not been any eviction freezes, like on the city side. County, I know that they want to do some sort of freeze on it. I don't know if they actually signed that motion. So presently now, I don't know of any eviction freezes at the local level. And at the state level, I don't believe there's eviction freezes. Now, as far as the things to caution landlords about is, I suspect you're going to have a lot of people kind of flooding the market that are saying, hey, I was a victim of this wildfire. I was a tenant in one of the houses that burned down, or I lost my house and I don't have any proof of that because I everything was burnt down. So you're going to run into sort of people are going to have very limited access to sort of what they can give you. Um, usually you get bank statements to verify that the income is actually coming in. You want to verify employment. You want to verify if this is a tenant that lived in a house that burnt down, right? You still want to kind of verify, like, hey, did they actually live here? Is this something that happened? Because you as a landlord, it's not that you want to doubt these people who are already suffering tremendously, but we all know as a society there's scammers out there, which we sort of preface this conversation. There will be scammers. There will be people who kind of, tug at your pathos and your willingness to help, but maybe they're scamming and they're not actually victims. So that's something that you want to be very careful of. You want to be very careful how you're advertising your rental just in general. But as far as your criteria, you still want to keep pretty tight to your criteria and understand if you're taking somebody, um, you know, you're potentially changing your criteria. And then the other thing is, price gouging aside, which we'll get to, you're entering leases with these people. So I know that they're short term, and I think the county is working on sort of laxing their short term rental laws. LA City Council has, they have a committee now, so they're going to pump out some sort of rules and regulations. They haven't voted on anything quite yet. I haven't heard much from any other jurisdictions, but I know for sort of the not necessarily the price gouging, but the lease term issue. Like these people, once they're in, it doesn't matter if you said you can stay on my couch for a week or you can stay on it for 18 months. Once you take these people in, they're going to be tenants and they're going to have tenant rights. So if you're someone who goes, hey, I just want to, help out for, a couple weeks or month, while these people try to find temporary housing, or permanent housing while their house gets built or whatever, just know once they're in there, and the only way you get people out is typically by eviction. So you want to be very mindful of that.
Interesting side note. What if someone is allowing someone to say stay in their guest house for free? So they're not
So,
actually paying a rent, but
mhm,
there they are nonetheless. And
yeah.
the deal was they get to stay for a month, but then they have to be out.
No written
So
agreement, handshake, goodness of their heart.
handshake, no ring. So you, that's what I understand that to be is a tenancy at will, that you can terminate on a 30 days notice. I believe the police or the sheriff could come take that person out because it's sort of a tenancy at will. I know that the police and the sheriff are not really, they're really reluctant to do that. They don't like, they usually side with the person in the house. So if you're someone staying with you for free, hopefully it's someone that right? So it's a family member or it's a friend that like you personally if you're housing someone for free, that's a friend of a friend of a friend, you're sort of doing that at your own risk. If you're not collecting money, you should be able to just tell them, hey, here's a notice, you need to move out. You're not paying rent, you're not a tenant here, you're just a tenant at will, you're like a guest. But that's also another thing is you have people, and a lot of times landlords start that way. And then it could go on like, oh, well, can you just like help pay for utilities? And now you're sort of creating this tenancy, right? Like you're collecting money from them, whether it's a little bit, whether it's below market rent, whether, it's something. Then you run in the risk, like once you've done that exchange, you've created a sort of an oral contract for this. So you want to be
Yes.
very careful of having people come into whether it's your vacant unit, your own bedroom in your house that's extra. There's tenancy rights, and it's easy to put someone in and incredibly hard to get somebody out, especially if
Yes.
it's someone on your property or in your house. It could become a very traumatizing experience. These people, people are already traumatized by it and they have really nowhere to go and they don't have a lot of resources. So, it's a survivalist mode in many ways for some people.
So let's do talk about price gouging for a moment, and I know there are some examples that we have all talked about offline, and I know it's very confusing. It appears that there are a few loopholes here and there that I know people are trying to skirt and to get around. I have heard a news conference with Nathan Hochman, the new city attorney, and he seems very intent on going after people, as will the state. So can you share with us a little bit about what you know in the world of price gouging, what you've heard is already taking place, and sort of just some of the rough parameters, and maybe a resource for people to really have a source to get up to speed?
Yeah, I talked about this in my newsletter this past week where I sort of gave an FAQ on where things stand for landlords. I'll try to send another newsletter out, Sunday or Monday, as I kind of parse through all the latest updates. What I understand with price gouging is it's a two-prong rule. It's effective through March 8th, 2025. It is subject to the governor continuing it. Under his powers, I give him a year to continue. So he can declare emergency and he can roll it every 30 days, up to a year. So this is a state level price gouging measure. It's not local, it's the state. And the state is saying, if you had a vacant unit leased in the past year, whatever the amount was before the fire, you can only add 10% on top of that. So if you had it for $3,000, you can add 10%, $300. If I'm an attorney, so math is not my best, but I think I was right there. If you had a property that was vacant and has not been listed for rent in the past year, right? Maybe you had a house, there's quite a few people that have houses that, you know what, my wife and I have moved to another state and we had this house and we weren't sure what we were going to do with it. The housing market has been crazy. Some people are not selling, some people are holding, they don't know what to do. But I see that people need housing, so I would like to list my house for rent. But it hasn't been listed in the past year. But comps in my neighborhood show that my houses were $50,000 a month. But if I go look at the HUD, it's worth less, because the second prong says if you have not listed it in the past year, you have to take the HUD amount for that zip code, and it has it per bedroom. So the number of bedrooms you have, and you get 160% of that. So people have done calculations and they go, well, my house, given the comps of the past year, is worth $50,000 a month. But here I have this HUD calculation that's saying it's worth 8. Well, I don't want to lease it for 8 because, there's rent control in general, right? There's price increase measures. I don't want to have to be entering a lease in a year from now, raise it to the market, and then I got to pay relocation, or I'm setting myself up to be way under market. And that would throw comps off for the entire neighborhood in general going forward. And I'm very realistic with people. Not a lot of people are in the market for a 50, 60, 70, $80,000 house, and they exist. They do exist in LA. So it's not every tenant is going to be subject of like, I couldn't rent this kind of house. But there are landlords that do have these houses, and there are people who were, especially in the Palisades fire, that would be, hey, I'm willing to pay that. And that was sort of the issue that the government was afraid of. They go, hey, we're going to have pricing wars where people are going to be willing to pay above, our 10% price gouging measure simply because they need the housing. But your landlords are kind of caught in a catch-22, which is my house is, fire aside, the comps were way higher than what the HUD has calculated. So I, as a landlord, I'm reluctant to make this house available for rent when I know there's people willing and able to pay it. It's not like they're desperately paying it. It's like this would be in their price realm regardless. But I don't want to have to be subject to this HUD law where I'm undervaluing my house, because these properties do have expenses on them. So I've heard some of the loopholes where people go, the price gouging measures for leases 12 months or less. So people are going, I'm going to do a lease for 18 months to get around that. And I don't, at this moment, don't feel comfortable enough to tell a landlord that that's a valid way to get around. And simply because, as you mentioned, our new DA and the Attorney General himself has sent over 200 letters to landlords and real estate professionals accusing them of price gouging. And there's already been one real estate agent who's being prosecuted for price gouging. So you don't want to be the example for that, basically. You don't want to be the landlord who charged market rate, which was above what HUD had calculated. And now you're going to be the litany test for this.
Yes.
And we've seen evidence of, something at the beginning of the month being listed for $20,000 a month. And then as soon as the fires happen, jumps to 40,000 a month, right? So I mean,
Have you
there are
seen the
some very
Google Doc?
clear. Have I seen
There's
the
a
Google
Google
one?
Doc about that. Yeah, there's a Google Doc
Yes, I've
that
heard
people
about it.
started putting together of the Zillow. I've seen it. I have a copy of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and
Yes.
there's there are things like that that are very clearly, price gouging, and then there's the gray area, which is more what you were just discussing, which is, it's an exceptional house. It's got views of and skyline views and
Well, it's
airliner
luxury.
views, and
It's
yeah, it's
yeah.
luxury exactly. What is a comp for this? Because is there even a comp for it? So yeah, it's challenging.
I what I suspect is going to happen here is I think there's going to be more clarification as people are actually, because a lot of people were in housing and hotels. They were getting emergency vouchers to stay in hotels. So as people are sort of retooling and figuring out, okay, what are we going to do? The Palisades, and not to completely disregard Altadena, but the Palisades is really where people are sort of afraid that those are the more, affluent areas where they're going to be coming into the market. And so there's considerations because the Palisades did have a lot of families. So now people are going to
Yeah.
be shopping for school districts, right? I got to get my kids in school. I don't know what's going to happen with the schools, given that all the schools burned down in the Palisades. Are they going to turn to Zoom? Are they going to have to move to new neighborhoods and put their kids in a completely different school district? Because Zoom might go on for the rest of this year. But what about next year? These families have to think ahead. And so sometimes they're going to want to live in areas where the housing is expensive, but they're buying the school district and they have the means to do it. So being realistic, I can't say like, well, landlords are just not going to have to get market rent. Like, no, a landlord should not be price gouging. I absolutely disagree with that. Trying to be extremely advantageous in that sense is not good. But if you have a house and, pre-fire, that was the market rent, that's the reality. Not everybody's going to be leasing in those houses. Not everybody's going to be moving into Brentwood or Beverly Hills or Santa Monica. Some people are going to probably go in a little more inland. They might go to Culver City. They might go as far out as, mid-city. Maybe they'll go across town. You don't really know. So people tend to they're going to stay closer to where they lost their homes because that's kind of where their center and their base is. But there's going to be this reality where these people are going to have the means to pay this rent. And so I'm suspecting at some point there will be clarifications about the difference between sort of what is HUD and what is an exception because it's a luxury house. Rent controls to some degree in some areas do account for luxury rentals. So I think there might be some more guidelines on that. But when we have emergencies like this, the government tends to act fast to kind of pause everything. I'm hoping, and it seems that they're being a little more mindful of what they're going to do next. At the city level, at least, I was impressed that they held off on sort of voting on these drastic measures because they do have to be mindful. Like it's a huge impact, but it wasn't like COVID where it was like everybody on the planet. This is a very localized thing that we should be able to address at a very local level. But I would say for tenants themselves, whether you're going to be finding something at an extreme luxury level or you're going to be going into the tenancy pool, which is already sort of a struggle for tenants. It's hard to get housing. There's not a lot of vacancies. You want to be very mindful of scams because those happen in general, irregardless of the fire, but they're most definitely going to happen because now there's this opportunity. Be very careful of things that are too good to be true. Be very careful of something that, there's all these comps in the neighborhood that are 5,000 and you see one that's 2,000. I've seen many people, have apartment buildings where the tenants know there's a unit vacant and they change the locks and they lease that unit and then the tenant disappears. And all of a sudden you have a complete stranger in a vacant unit and you're going to show your vacant unit and someone's in it. And they're like, well, what do you mean? Like I did it all through Venmo and I paid this person or I did it through Zelle and I gave them this money and I paid all this stuff. And because that happened to a woman already on the news where she already got scammed and she gave, a deposit of like several $1,000s to like hold this, apartment so that she could move into it. And she was like trying to gather herself and she got scammed. So you want to be sure that you're talking to the person who's actually the property manager or the owner of the property. You want to do your research. You want to take that address, double check if it's listed in multiple spots or not. Be very, very careful with Craigslist. Be very careful with Facebook Marketplace. Um, don't, if no one asks for
And
rental
and
application. Hmm.
if I may, just cutting in, anyone listening to this, if you think something might be too good to be true, or you want help in verifying who the owners are, John and I have resources to
Hmm.
do that. Absolutely do it for free. Just give us a call or reach out to us, DM us. But we'll go ahead and do what we can to verify who the actual owner of that property is.
Yes, because you don't want to be, and I've seen it happen just in general, I've come across it. If they don't ask for a rental application, that's a major red flag. If they don't, if they're not asking for a rental application, but they're asking you for your bank account information, and it's just some random person that you're texting, very, big red flag. If they're asking for a whole deposit, huge red flag. If you've never seen the place, huge red flag. So you definitely want to, especially as a tenant, do your due diligence. And if you're a victim of a wildfire, right? I mean, you've lost everything, and whatever you have, whether it's the savings, or just money you have in general, you want to be mindful that like that's kind of your safety net. That's your nest egg. You can't just be haphazardly spending that out during like really hard times. Especially people are going to be dealing with insurance. They're trying to expedite insurance payouts as fast as possible at a state level. But you just don't want to be ripped off. And I've seen it happen to people. But definitely tenants are going to be in a desperate spot right now.
Yeah.
Right
Well,
on.
thank you for that. That's great information, Sasha. We so appreciate you being with us today. Any final thoughts, anything that we haven't discussed that you think is really pertinent in the moment as all of this is unfolding?
Yeah, I would say if you're a landlord, I appreciate all the landlords that have come forward and, made housing available, have worked towards getting, tenants in, try to swiftly address rental applications and who aren't price gouging. I also would say for all of the landlords that when there's, things that are coming up at a local level, whether it's the Board of Supervisors, it's LA City Council, it's Santa Monica, it's Culver City, wherever you're at, if you're a property owner, you really have to make sure that you show up to these meetings and get educated about what they want to do and voice your concerns about what they want to do. I'm a member of AGLA, which is the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles. They do a lot of advocacy work for landlords. They keep their pulse on these things. They're at all of the meetings. But you have to make sure that you voice your concern about these laws before they get passed without any sort of commentary of you guys actually being the housing providers.
Great.
And
Thank you so much. Again,
and
great advice.
Sasha, if someone
Mm-hmm.
wants to get your newsletter, where
Mm-hmm.
can they sign up for it?
So my website is struthers.legal. And right on the front page is the little bar where you can sign up. You can put your email in, you can get access to my newsletter, and you can sign up for it right there.
Yeah,
And
great newsletter this week. Incredible information, packed with links, all sorts of things there for you. I went through it and thank you. And I felt more informed having read it myself.
all right, thank you so much for your time and your energy and your expertise. We hope this was helpful to landlords and tenants out there. If you want more information about resources that are out there for victims of the wildfire or any real estate needs, you know where to find us.
Yes. So I'm an attorney in Los Angeles. I have a law practice that focuses on cash for keys or tenant buyouts. I do help landlords also with matters with government agencies such as RAPE or the Civil Rights Division department complaints. I've had experience managing real estate, all multifamily in the rent control of LA City. I do send out a weekly newsletter, so I keep updated every week on what's the latest going on at a state level, local level, federal level on real estate.